Shalom, Tel Aviv. How are we today? Good? Nice. Thank you. So, good morning, everyone. I would like to comment a bit of a change that we're going to be making. The talk was called Stroll Through the Metaverse. I found out that one of the awesome speakers is Martin, so I'm going to be doing an intro to WebVR. Martin is going to be taking over some of the coding. So just don't worry if you see a different title on the presentation. It's an honor to be here on YGLF. The presentation is WebVR, an offspring of two worlds. I am Diego Gonzales from Samsung Research United Kingdom, and on behalf of the team, it's an honor to be here. The agenda that we have for today, first we're going to start mentioning about Samsung Internet. We're going to then dive into WebVR, focusing on 4 different things that make WebVR a great VR approach from the web perspective, which are discoverability, reach, immediacy, and social. We're going to then see a couple of examples to then talk about web and VR, and then ask ourselves what comes next. So, in Samsung Research United Kingdom, I work for the Samsung Internet team, which are these lovely fellas that you see here. You might recognize some of the happy faces that are in the picture. Worry not, you got the happiest of them all. Now, Samsung Internet. What specifically is Samsung Internet? And I would like to ask, who knows what Samsung Internet is? Can I see some hands? Are we aware? Okay, thank you very much. Part of the idea of me being here is actually to share with you this. Samsung Internet is the Samsung web browser. It is the default browser in Galaxy devices. Now, you might be thinking, why is this relevant? Well, it's relevant because in Europe, in North America, in Israel, we are the second most used Android browser, and in general, we are the 3rd most used mobile browser. So if you're developing web experiences or web VR experiences, it might make sense to be testing on the browser, not to leave your users behind. Now, a couple of interesting details about the browser as well. It's Chromium-based. And as a fun fact, Samsung is the 2nd largest open source contributor to the Chromium project. It's now an Android browser, so you don't need a Samsung device in order to test and use this browser. And this is kind of new. We started the rollout of version 6.2 yesterday, which I am very happy to say that it comes now with vitamin D and 100% more CSS grid. Do we have any CSS grid fans on? Good. Okay, so we have a fan over here. I would like to give a token of appreciation to CSS grid. Can we hand it over? Good. So we were hearing yesterday this wonderful presentation, and one of the things, I actually took this picture from Woody's Twitter, so there's the credit, about how 2017 is the year of CSS Grid. I've just kind of like updated a bit the presentation with the latest news that we announced yesterday. So thank you for supporting, and let's get this party started. When we're talking about bringing these type of new features into a web browser, it makes sense that we are talking about an evergreen browser. And the evergreen approach means that we have a browser that's being constantly updated through the Play Store, and we are constantly contributing and bringing the latest and greatest web standards and features to our platform. So if you're a web developer, it pretty much means that it's kind of like being Christmas every single day, because you're getting access to things like progressive web apps, web speech APIs, Bluetooth, payments, gamepads, physical web, now CSS Grid, and the one that brought us here today, which is the WebVR API. So this is where our journey begins, and when we talk about WebVR, we of course think about the intersection of web and VR, but users expect something when they see the word web and when they see the web VR. From a web perspective, they expect linkability, and I personally think that this is one of the superpowers that we have from the web, where we are able to reference a resource that is online, and this helps with sharing this resource over messaging, chats, any other type of way of communication. We expect a shared context where we are already logged into our favorite services, and we expect these services to be available in our session and in our context. Of course, the web needs to be, and we expect it to be, open and accessible in a way that gives the user choice of how to consume this information, independent and very related to cross-platform, cross-device. And finally, something that we are very concerned in Samsung Internet, user privacy, and always making sure that we are asking the right permissions and making sure that privacy is maintained. On the other side, if we're talking about VR, users come to expect certain things like some sort of orientation or position tracking. They expect as well to be immersed in a content that is putting them in the center of the application of the experience itself. Something that can cover from a simple 360 image or 360 video to actually being in a full virtual world. And above all, low latency, because we do not want to break the immersion, the illusion of immersion with the user. So, with this, might seem an easy question, but what is WebVR? Can somebody in the audience raise their hands and volunteer to tell me what do you think WebVR is? There's a free pair of socks. No volunteers? Okay. Very good. Can we have... Thank you very much. I could have not said it better. So, indeed, if we put it in a very simple way, the WebVR API is this JavaScript API that gives the browser awareness of what are the VR devices that are connected to the machine where it's running. So, if we read the definition here, it allows me to create immersive 3D virtual reality experiences that are powered and running through the browser. And this is a very hot topic. It's the tech that we believe it's going to bring VR to the masses. Who is supporting this? If we're talking about support, we have several big players that are already on board. We can start with Samsung Internet, which was the first consumer mobile browser that had WebVR support for the Gear VR. Firefox, which is shipping WebVR in stable since version 55. Chrome for Android, which is supporting, of course, Daydream devices. Edge, which is shipping support in version 15, and it's actually enabling WebVR for Windows mixed reality. I actually tried it 2 days ago, and it was amazing. And Oculus, which is shipping a browser for the Gear VR, the Oculus browser. And we have even some partial support in Opera with native reproduction of 360 videos and experiences. So, if we look now at a hardware perspective, we have different type of experiences depending on the hardware and browsers that we're using. We can be talking about a magic window, and magic window is this experience where you're using a phone as if it were a window to the virtual world. We have 3 degrees of freedom, or basically orientation tracking. So this experience is like the Daydream and the Gear VR, where you're actually tracking the orientation of a controller. You have 6 degrees of freedom, where you're actually tracking orientation and position as well. So let's say the high-end headsets, Vive and Rift. And I've added 2 other bullets, other bullet points, because I find them to be quite interesting and quite unique to the web environments. First, we have controllers. Depending on the experience that you want to develop, you might want to be interested in hooking up an Xbox controller, a standard Bluetooth controller, a Nintendo Joy-Con controller to the browser. And I'm actually happy to report that this is already supported through the Gamepad API, and it can enable very different type of VR experiences, as well as any other type of device that you can use to control, such as a leap motion, such as a Kinect. So if you're thinking about doing something that requires a Joy-Con, a Kinect, and any other crazy combination of hardware, then the web is your playground. Not hardware specifically, but just want to point out support for the web speech API with a couple of different interfaces for synthesis and recognition. So if you actually wanted to do voice control in your VR experience or in any web experience, you're also able to do it. Now, more specifically, if we're talking specifically about the platforms, if you're thinking about developing for VR, then probably you're thinking about targeting one of the platforms that we have on the left. Now, you can see that independent of platform and browser that you want to target, WebVR has compatibility with each and every single one of them. Now, if someone finds a check under the Apple platform, they get a pair of free socks as well. And you might be wondering, what about, indeed, iOS support? This doesn't mean anything, or it can, or it doesn't. It's kind of like the same state that we are with service workers, where we're just crossing our fingers that it will eventually happen one day. But Apple joined the list of participants in the W3C WebVR community group, and in any case, if Apple is your cup of tea, then you can rest assured that your WebVR experiences are going to be running due to the WebVR polyfill. So independent of platform, browser, or device, you're going to be able to engage with your users in these platforms. In something related, we have the concept of progressive enhancement, where it's not only about having the support for different platforms, but we are also interested in making sure that the content that you are creating is truly accessible. And accessibility here, we are defining the term of making sure that the content is not locked down to a single platform. It should be accessible from any type of combination. So it's very elegant if, from a design perspective, your VR experience goes from working on a magic window and then just doing some feature detection and some platform detection. If you're detecting that you have a 3 degrees of freedom controller, then you can elegantly adapt all the way to going to a higher VR headset where, again, your experience should adapt. And we presented 2 days ago an example of this at Mozilla Festival in London. This was a project that was led by Thomas Palou and worked with as well with Fabien Benetou, where we created this application that if you're using it on a mobile phone, then you're going to get a 3 degrees of freedom because you have the orientation and you kind of have like a turret. It's kind of like a tower defense game where you would have to defend a castle from being attacked from Vikings. Eventually, when you would see it, we tried it with a Windows mixed reality headset. When you would see it on the Edge browser, you would get 2 hammers, and you would be able to start smacking down the enemies that were coming your way. If you were a phone, then you can start shooting at them. And we wanted to explore this idea of how would an application adapt depending on the devices that you had. Now, we can already start seeing the benefits of this from a technical point of view, but why does this really matter? There are 4 things that I mentioned in the agenda that we're going to be covering. And first, we can talk about discoverability that we get with the web, the reach that we're getting, ubiquitous and immediacy of the content, and the social aspect of this one. So in order to talk about discoverability, I'm going to mention another example that we worked on at Samsung Internet for an experience earlier this year. We teamed up with a fashion designer in Singapore that had a very specific vision of not only a dress, but a statement on how can we make a criticism about the state of noise pollution in the world, and how can it affect us, how can it make us a bit more stressed, and anxious. So these are the pictures of the dress by designer Galina Mihaleva, and we actually thought, it would be interesting if we can have the LEDs lighting up to different decibel, to the average decibel level of certain parts of the world, so they would be lighting up based on this scale. And we thought, it's very interesting if we can actually visualize this, and since, of course, putting a headset on anything makes it immediately sexier, then we decided to put a headset on the project itself. And these are actually pictures from the presentation that we had at the Look Forward Fashion Tech Festival in Paris a couple of months ago. Now, we used a couple of tricks to make sure that the discoverability of our VR application was going to be maxed out. Some of them are these three. First of all, physical web. The dress itself had inside hidden a physical web beacon that was broadcasting a URL, and thus the importance of having this linkability and shareability of the URL in these type of VR experiences. So we had a physical beacon that was broadcasting the URL to people that were around 50 to 70 meters away from the dress, and they were immediately engaging with the content without even being right next to the dress. We also had a couple of QR codes that would kind of like deep link to specific places in the VR experience, which QR codes might not be that big in the Western world, but in Asia, they are quite a big and important way of distributing information. And finally, progressive web apps, which is this new, cool, kind of like buzzword that's been discussed at the moment by browser vendors, and that's why I want to make just an emphasis on this concept over here. So think about our WebVR application, and we are able to provide to this WebVR application an icon on the home screen for quick access. We're able to get now push notifications as well from this application to keep the user engaged and coming back to the experience if it's an experience that requires it. It's a frictionless experience by design. Depending on the browser, Samsung Internet, Mozilla are already, well, Mozilla and Nightly are already displaying add to home screen ambient badging, where you can easily add the link to your home screen. We could use it to preload assets. So the next time we can use it to preload assets, let's say, think about having the bare minimum low resolution textures that you need for your VR experiences that are already loaded, and then while you have connectivity, then you can kind of like start progressively downloading the content that you would need. And this is actually kind of cool. There has been some talk by Google and by Microsoft about automatic ingestion into the app stores. So if you have a website or a WebVR application, in this case, myself and a colleague, Peter, we like to call them progressive WebVR applications, you would be able to, the App Store would automatically detect them and list them in their catalog. So this is how we think discoverability would go with VR in a web experience. So I just want to show you a brief example of how this would be. Can anyone think about what is the most iconic PWA that has been developed to date? The one PWA that was made to rule them all. The one that started it. The air horner, correctly. And sorry, good. Indeed, we're talking about the air horner by Paul Kinland. So it only made sense that in order to prove PWAs and WebVR, we created the air horner VR. If you want to give it a try, you have here the URL. This is the way that we would be. This is a small example to kind of prove PWAs and WebVR. Now, if we put all these concepts together, the ones that I've just mentioned, we are saying that we can go from a physical object, and in this case, let's not think about a dress. Let's think about something that could be a museum, a theater, an exhibition. We could go from a physical object to the browser to your home screen, to your headset. And we could do all of this with web technologies in less than 30 seconds, engagement for the user. If that is not engaging fast in VR with your audience, then I truly don't know what it is. Let's move on a bit to reach. So if we're talking about reach, it's very interesting and attractive, the idea of not having to go through app stores or walled gardens. Why would you want to ask your user to wait several minutes to download hundreds of megabytes or gigabyte or a couple of gigabytes, which is generally the case for VR experiences, to download an application for an experience that they will most likely use only once? Doesn't make much sense. Depends again on the type of scenario that we have. But there's no need to limit your reach. You just have at your disposal the widest delivery network in existence. You have a modern browser, then you're pretty much good to go to start engaging in basic, simple ways with VR. We also know that the web is not going anywhere, and we truly believe that VR can go the same way that video has gone and take the web as the predominant delivery platform. So we talk about being ubiquitous and immediate. Again, all you need is a modern web browser. You want to see right now a beach in Costa Rica, or the gardens by the bay in Singapore, or the back of the LA, of the Hollywood sign in LA, just take that URL, put it in your browser, and you're immediately in a simple 360 image viewer that is built and running in your browser. No app required, no going to application stores. It's, again, frictionless by design. And this is what we refer to being ubiquitous and being an immediate experience, that you can take this link, send it to anyone, and they're already experiencing in one way or another the VR experience. And of course, if you put this in a headset, you're immersed. If you put this in a headset that has position tracking, if you duck, you're going to see that your perspective is actually changing. So this is how we would see the progressive enhancement going. If we go to social experiences, again, here we have a couple of experiences. And notice that I'm only focusing on things that we have developed by the team. I'll get to that a bit later. But for example, our colleague, Lady Ada King, she did this experience where in a presentation she managed to get 200 people in a WebVR scene for a conference. We created another experience. It was actually tweaked by Peter and was shown at Chrome Dev Summit a couple of weeks ago or last week, I don't exactly remember, where we have kind of like a Hungry Hippo game. 2 players join, the other ones are joining as spectators, and it was all working on WebVR. Depending on the technology that you're using to create this, then you're going to be able to use Network Dayframe, a wrapper like Peer.js, or you might do it directly in WebRTC. What I want you to know here is that we are taking existing web technologies and using them for our VR experiences. So these examples show how WebVR can be an accessible platform for creatives, developers, and makers. Depending on your platform of choice, your frameworks of choice, then you can start using any of these. If you're a more end-user type of audience, then you can start playing with Visor. You can start playing with different options that are already out for consumers in order to create VR presentations. I want everyone today in this room to challenge the idea that VR is difficult and spooky, especially because we're in Halloween, and I know that when you actually see, it can be a bit spooky, but that you as web developers already have everything in your hands to be VR content producers. Now, good or bad content producers is another thing, but you already have the tools in your hand to be able to create VR scenes. And the way that you would do it is basically, in this case, I'm going to be talking a little bit about A-frame. I'm showing you here some code, how you would start with the A scene, but I'm kidding here, I'm not gonna show code, I'm gonna leave that to Martin, because he is gonna do a handoff from this presentation. But what I'm going to do is, we're going to take a look at a couple of examples, again, developed by the team that really changed our perspective on what are the things that we can do with WebVR. First one of them is this experience that's called Ava. It's a project in collaboration with a couple of archaeologists from the Akavanic Beaker Burial Project in the north of Scotland. Basically, it's about a burial site, from this young woman that was buried around 4,250 years ago. So research came up with some things, and the archaeologist Maya, she really enjoys drawing cartoons. And the way that she likes to express her findings is through creating storyboards and drawing. And when we approached her, the idea was like, maybe we can kind of take these 2D assets and transform them into a WebVR experience. Some things that really caught my attention. First, we presented this in the Museum of Scotland 1 month ago, more or less. And 2 things stood out for me. We asked a 5-year-old kid what he was seeing, and his answer was, it's so full of niceness, which I think it's kind of cool to get that type of feedback from your applications. But more notably is the fact that the archaeologist, which is actually Maya, the one that's standing on the back, she was telling me it was quite shocking to see that a 5-year-old kid was able to accurately describe a village from 4,000 years ago in the north of Scotland. And then this is when we start seeing the real power that we have from modifying learning journeys with using these type of tools that are available for all of us. And the second thing was that Maya, she does not do 3D modeling. She is not a VR developer. I met up with her one day in Edinburgh, kind of went through what A-frame is, what the A-frame inspector is. She pretty much created this experience all by herself. I tweaked a bit here and there, but the whole structure, she actually took the inspector and she built it, and I was actually just amazed to see, when we gave a creative and a user in a different area what they were able to build. Kind of like democratizing this idea of getting VR into the hands of everyone. And as she told me, as an archaeologist, I actually never thought that I would be creating a 3D VR world to express the findings of my research. And that was very, very cool. This is another experience that came from the same approach that we did with the University of Edinburgh. Finding Ava, which is a RoomScape type experience that teaches us the archaeological process in the field. In the picture, we can see the developer, a non-technical user in the end, and she created this experience by herself with A-frame. So again, it really shocks me how much we can do when we get this type of technology into the hands of users. Communication is indeed beautiful, and in the end, VR, the only thing that's making is allowing us to express ourselves in new ways. And some of these ways will definitely hop into the web and the existing web content, because I constantly think about how we relate WebVR and VR in general with creating massive worlds where I'm actually in a shooter or some type of alien surface or just across the world. But it's very interesting when we think not about VR on the web, which is what we've been discussing till now, but about the web on VR. And there are 3 things that come to mind, judging by the developments of the industry in the past couple of years. First, new browsers. Second, new workflows. And third, a new axis. These 3 are concepts that we have to keep in mind as developers and that we are in the right position to start defining. When we're talking about new browsers, we can mention quite a few. Samsung Internet for Gear VR, Chrome for Daydream devices, the Oculus browser, servo running on a headset. All these type of new interactions, all this type of available space that we have really kind of like begs the question, how can we take advantage of this for the existing HTML content that we have? Because not everything is going to be VR, and I'm crossing my fingers that we're not going to be in the type of M.dot era where you would have a completely different experience for VR and a completely different experience, for mobile and a completely different experience for desktop. That's not what we want for VR. We want progressive enhancement and sites that are complete. Second, very related with this one is new workflows. I might be watching a 360 video in my browser on my phone. Happen to get a headset, I can just pop in the phone into the headset and I'm immediately immersed. But we need to work to make this transparent for the user. The workflow has to be automatic. If I take the phone, then I am in the exact same position where I left before when I finished with the phone in VR. And again, this is something that we need to be working on to get these type of workflows with current and upcoming VR applications. And the last one, which is the one that I'm personally more interested about, is the new axis, because this is from Josh Carpenter from Google. He's been playing around with UX in VR. Back in the day, there's this project where we were trying to get stereoscopic web pages and bringing HTML elements outside of the web page or into the web page, depending on certain factors. But I really find this interesting because we can actually start defining a semantics to depth. Instead of using it as a gimmick to just make something more attractive, is how can we use depth in a way that would help accessibility, that would help, for example, visualization of information. Think about infographics that don't have to be fully spatial 3D, but think about having a canvas where you can actually draw elements in different layers, these type of things. So to kind of sum it up, we have web and VR, and at Samsung Internet, we are very excited and pushing very hard for this because we think that it's the type of technology that's going to democratize VR, to really get VR to the masses. It's definitely helping to commoditize VR, and that's what we would want to see. And let's say I was talking to a developer yesterday. He was telling me that hopefully in 10 years this is going to be a commodity, and it's not going to be the huge novel topic. We love it because we can use a flexible technology, flexible and open technology stack, and we can enable truly innovative experiences that are gravitating around discoverability, reach, immediacy, and social, because that is what the web provides anyway. So having gotten an idea of what WebVR is, and can I see some hands if we are more or less clear what WebVR is? Otherwise, I'm not doing my job very, very well. Then the question is, what exactly comes next? In the foreseeable future, very close foreseeable future, is WebVR 2.0, which is just the next version of the spec, which, independent of the changes that the spec is going, I think that probably some of the most interesting and important things that are related with the upcoming specification are related to security, privacy, and comfort. How can we make sure that the UI elements in which you are gazing and tapping a URL, filling in a form, are truly safe? How can we work on blurring an active session in order to keep those UI controls truly protected? Having a trusted environment. So if we have underperforming content that's just lagging in the browser, or generally bad tracking, or experiences that are unpurposely trying to scare you or feel uncomfortable, how can we get back to this trusted environment and make sure that the user is always feeling comfortable and safe? Of course, content isolation, so having a different independent content context, for drawing, different request animation frame that is going to be running in the headset, different canvas, etc., and fingerprinting. So we do need to identify which are the devices that we are using to create the VR experiences. We do need to know what's the device in order to know what's the capability, but we need to keep these configurations as generic as possible just to make sure that we are not enabling this as a way of tracking the users. So this is in the very foreseeable, in the very near foreseeable future. What comes even afterwards? This is where I would like to do a call for action to all of you that are here in this session. We are hosting in December, 5th, 6th, and 7th of December in Brussels. We are hosting a workshop on WebVR authoring. We want to identify challenges and opportunities. So if this is something that you are interested in, if you're interested in WebVR, in bringing experiences to virtual immersive worlds, all the browser manufacturers have confirmed that are going to be there. Google, Microsoft, Mozilla, Samsung. I think I'm not missing anyone. They're going to be there. We want to hear, what do you think, if you're developing VR experiences, web VR experiences, what are the pain points that you're having when you're trying to create these experiences? So please, if it's something that you're truly interested in helping shape the future of the specification, then register, and I hope to see you in Brussels this December. Thank you very much.